I did not lose my marriage to betrayal. I lost it to silence. To a habit so small it felt harmless. To the choice of saying nothing. One ordinary evening at a time. If you are over 45, if you have kids who communicate with you in short texts, and if dinner has turned into a quiet exchange of plates and receipts, stay with me. By the end of this story, you will know the one mistake that slowly unravels love. And I will ask you to take one small action tonight. It might save something you think is already gone. I was 59 when the boxes showed up. Nothing dramatic. Brown tape. My name is in black marker. She did not slam doors. She did not scream. She packed quietly. We had been living like courteous roommates. No fights. No fire. Just weather. I used to think love was a feeling that visited us. When the butterflies left, I waited for them to come back. I didn't notice how often I reached for my phone instead of taking her hand. How often I swallowed words because work was heavy and the game was on. I told myself tomorrow. After the deadline. After the kids move out. After we are less tired. The truth is simple. Neglect is not an event. It is a rhythm. It is paying the bill without meeting the eyes across the table. It is bringing dessert home. But eating it in front of a screen. It is thinking. I should tell her that story from the office. And then leave the room. It is postponing tenderness until the day demands no energy. That day never comes. When the last box left the living room, the house was not empty. It was full of conversations that never happened. I sat in the quiet and realized that silence is not neutral. It takes sides. It always sides with distance. I wish I could tell you I woke up the next morning transformed. I did not. I did what people my age do. I worked. I avoided the hard call. I stacked my calendar like sandbags against a flood I refused to name. Weeks later, a neighbor passed away. The church was full of photographs. There were stories about small things. He made pancakes on Saturdays. He left notes in lunchboxes. He called his brother every Friday before dinner. No one mentioned promotions. No one mentioned how neat his garage was. After the service, my daughter asked if I was coming to the diner with the family. I said I was tired. She nodded. Kind. Distant. That night I heated leftovers and scrolled through people I did not know. There was a video about gratitude. There was advice on how to communicate in marriage. I saved it and went to bed. I did not call my daughter back. Here is the mistake in one sentence. I kept my love a secret from the people I loved. I assumed they knew. I assumed they could read my mind the way I read my own history. I assumed having good intentions was the same as making good memories. If this sounds like your life, do not turn away. You do not need a grand gesture. You need a decision. Stay with me until the end. Then do one small thing. Send a message with no agenda. 2 sentences. I was thinking about you. I am grateful for you. That is where we start. I lost a marriage. I am not interested in losing anything else. I am 62 now. I am learning to be loud about the quiet things. I am learning that love is not a feeling I wait for. It is a thing I do. If you are still here, take a breath. Place your phone screen down. Look at the person in the room with you. If you are alone, it's picture the person you miss. We are going to talk about the nights that made the boxes appear. Then we will talk about how to live differently. Starting tonight. The first sign was small. She stopped asking me about my day. I told myself it meant she trusted me to handle it. In truth. And she had learned there was nothing new to hear. I worked in an office that loved meetings. We planned. We revised. We circled back. At 5:30, I would sit in traffic with a paper cup of coffee and a head full of other people's problems. By the time I reached our street, my patience had been spent on things that did not love me back. Inside. The house made ordinary sounds. Dishwasher. Television. The dog's nails are on the hardwood. We had a tradition of eating at the counter. Plates side by side. News murmuring. We were professionals at parallel. When the check came at restaurants, I reached for it automatically. She thanked me automatically. We were very polite. Our son moved to Denver. Our daughter taught 2nd grade in the city and learned to speak in voice notes. I told myself this was how families worked now. Everyone busy. Everyone fine. When my daughter sent a photo from her classroom, I tapped a heart and promised to call on Sunday. Sundays arrived heavy with chores. I answered emails and convinced myself that work was how I loved them. Provide. Protect. Postpone. One night, we went out for an anniversary dinner. The hostess wished us many more years and led us to a table with candles in little glass cups. I noticed the way the light made her ring shine. I told myself to say something kind. The waiter appeared. We ordered. The conversation found the weather and stayed there. On the drive home, she rested her head against the window. We passed the grocery store where we used to go late at night when the kids were small. Back then, the aisles were a playground. We split the list and met in the cereal section to compare treasures we did not need. I almost said, "Do you remember?" But the light turned green, and there was a song on the radio we both halfway liked. In therapy, years later, I learned a sentence that could have saved that night. Speak the obvious. Say what is true right now. I could have said, "I am nervous, and I do not know how to talk to you." I could have said, "I miss us." Instead, I kept score. How many times had I asked the first question? How many times had she turned back to her screen? Neglect is not laziness. It is arithmetic. It adds up day by day. At work, a colleague named Mark kept a picture of his wife taped to his monitor. He talked about her in a way that made the room softer. During lunch, he would step outside and call her for 10 minutes. He said, if he did not, the day ran ahead and he became a stranger to his own life. I told him that was sweet. I told myself I was too busy. The second sign was the way we used silence as a bandage. When something hurts, we let the day cover it. A joke. A chore. A show. Nothing to see here. Our friends complimented us on never fighting. We smiled and took credit for a peace we did not earn. On a Saturday in late fall, we drove to a farmer's market. I carried a bag of apples and tried to think of a question that did not feel like an interrogation. We stopped at a stall with pies. She touched the edge of a box and said her mother used to bake. There it was. An open door. I nodded and said the price looked good. We walked away with a pie neither of us wanted. That evening, our son called from the mountains to say the snow had come early. He sounded happy and far. I told him to send pictures. He said he would. He did not. I told myself I did not need them. I told myself I was fine with distance. The truth is, I was tired of being the first to reach. So I stopped. I waited to be called. I waited to be asked. I waited and built a case in my head. If they wanted to, they would. I made this sentence into a shield. It kept me safe from disappointment. It kept me alone. When the holidays arrived, we hosted dinner. People filled the house with stories. Siblings laughed in the kitchen. Neighbors crowded around the island. I carved the turkey and watched my wife from across the room. She was bright with everyone else. With me, she was careful. After dessert, we stacked plates and moved like a well-rehearsed team. No mistakes. No touch. At midnight, the house went quiet. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and thought of the first apartment we shared. A mattress on the floor. A calendar with a heart around the day rent was due. We were broke and reckless and exhausted and very alive. I wanted to say, "Do you remember the window that would not close?" But she was already asleep. I told myself tomorrow. Then I checked the locks and scrolled through strangers. In the morning at the hospital, I was at my desk reading an email that made my jaw tighten. My phone rang. It was my sister. Her voice was steady and wrong. Our mother had fallen in her kitchen. She was stable. They were running tests. Come if you can. The drive to the hospital was a long straight line. The sky had the color of a bruise. I parked on the 5th level and walked the ramps because the elevator felt too small for news. In the waiting room, my sister held a styrofoam cup and did not drink. We sat like children who had stayed out too late. When the doctor came, he spoke with the quiet authority of someone who does not guess. Good news in some areas. Concerns in others. We will know more tomorrow. In the hall, my sister asked if I could call our brother. I said, of course. Then I looked at his name on my screen and remembered the last time we spoke. I had corrected him about something unimportant and let the conversation die. We had been exchanging holiday texts for 3 years. He answered on the second ring and kept his voice brave. I told him what we knew. He said he would try to fly out and asked if we needed anything. I almost said, I need you to call me even when there is no emergency. Instead, I said, we are fine. That night, I slept in a chair and dreamed of our old house where the heat clanged in the walls and nobody locked the back door. In the morning, my daughter arrived with a tote bag of snacks. She hugged me and smelled like cold air and coffee. We walked to the cafeteria and sat by the window that looked over a parking lot full of people living the hardest days of their lives. She took a breath and said she needed to tell me something. She said she had stopped calling because she could not carry on both sides of the conversation anymore. She said when she asked how I was, I always said busy. She said she had learned to leave me alone. It is a strange thing to be told the truth by your child. It is like hearing your own voice on a recording and realizing that is how you sound to everyone else. I wanted to say, I was trying to protect you from my stress. I wanted to say, I thought I was being considerate. What I said was, I'm sorry. I said, I thought you knew. She shook her head gently. People your age think we can read your thoughts. She said, we cannot. We only see what you do. On the third day, our mother was cleared to go home with a list of new medications and rules. We made a chart on the fridge and argued about nothing in particular. At noon, my daughter needed to leave for a parent-teacher conference. At the Cur. B. She hugged me again and said she was proud of how I had handled everything. Then she asked if I wanted to come to her classroom one afternoon and read to the kids. I said I would check my schedule. She smiled in a way that told me she had expected that answer. On the way back to the house, I stopped at a store that sells cards. I stood in an aisle that smelled like ink and dust and read words written by strangers. Most were about holidays or apologies or birthdays. None said what I needed to say. I put them down and walked out with a pen and a stack of blank notes. At home, my wife was in the kitchen with my sister. They were measuring tea leaves and speaking softly. I watched them from the doorway and felt like a guest at a party I had not been invited to. I do not know how long I stood there before my wife looked up. She smiled the way you smile at a neighbor you genuinely like. It was kind. And it was not intimate. That night, I could not sleep. I made coffee at 2 in the morning and watched the steam rise like a signal. In the quiet, I tried to count all the moments I had chosen comfort over connection. It was not possible. The number was too large. I wrote a list of names on an envelope, and next to each name I wrote one detail that mattered. For my wife, I wrote, loves the way rain sounds on the garage roof. For my daughter, I wrote, keeps chalk in her coat pocket for sidewalk games. For my son, I wrote, laughs when the chair squeaks at the wrong time. At 6, I drove to the diner near the hospital. The waitress poured coffee without asking and called me honey. I opened the pen and wrote a note to my mother. I wrote about pancakes on Saturdays when we were small, and about the time she drove across town to bring me the library book I had forgotten for a project. I wrote that I was grateful for the way she never panicked in front of us. When I finished, I wrote a second note to my daughter, then one to my son, then one to my wife. I did not know what would happen when I handed them over. I only knew I was tired of being a polite ghost in my own life. I paid the bill and left a tip that made the waitress look up. On the sidewall, the air hurt clean in a way. The sky was the pale blue of a fresh start you do not trust yet. That afternoon, I drove my mother home and sat with her on the couch while she dozed. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. I looked at the framed photographs on the mantel and felt every year. When my wife came by with soup, and she set it gently on the counter and asked if I needed anything. I said I needed a walk. Would you come? She hesitated and said she had errands. I nodded and said, I understood. I did. We were all very busy. The night the neighbor's family held a small memorial in the church hall. I parked a block away and walked under a sky full of cold stars. Inside, the folding chairs made neat rows. On a table by the door, there were index cards where people could write a memory. I watched a teenage boy write in fierce small letters and slide his card under a candle. When it was time to speak, stories rose like lanterns. Someone talked about how the neighbor shoveled other people's sidewalks without being asked. Someone said he never let a birthday pass without a call. His sister told a story about the year he mailed their father a postcard every single week. None of the stories was large. All of them were loud in the way that matters. After, I drove aimlessly until the gas light blinked. At a red light, I looked at the stack of notes on the passenger seat. I had written them. I had not given them away. Because I was scared of the answer. Because once you speak the obvious, you cannot go back to pretending. I turned the car around and went home. The house was quiet. I left my shoes by the door and carried the notes to the kitchen. I put the one for my wife on the counter and stood there long enough to hear the refrigerator start and stop. Then I picked it up and walked down the hall. She was reading in bed with the light on low. I said I had written something and asked if I could read it. She looked at me for a long second and said, "Yes." I read slowly. I told her I had made our life into a schedule where love was penciled in and easy to erase. I told her I had hidden behind competence. I told her I missed our grocery store adventures and the bad coffee in paper cups. And the way she used to sing the wrong words on purpose. I told her I was sorry. I did not ask for anything. When I finished, I put the note on the nightstand and waited. She closed her book. For a moment, I thought I had broken something that could not be mended. Then she said she did not leave because I was unkind. She left because I was gone while sitting next to her. She said she was tired of living in a house where all the important things remained unsaid. She said she did not know if we could find our way back. But she was willing to try, if I was willing to practice being brave. We started small. 10 minutes after dinner with no screens. One question each. Not the safe kind. The kind that makes you look at each other. What scared you today? What made you glad? What did I miss? I called my daughter on Wednesday just to hear about her day. She told me a student had finally read a whole book and smiled the entire last page. I told her I was proud and asked if I could come read to the class next month. She said yes and sent a calendar invite like the professional she is. I accepted before the phone could ring. I texted my son on Friday before dinner and said I wanted a picture of the snow, even if it looked like every other picture of snow I had ever seen. He sent 3, each slightly different. He said he was trying a new recipe in a cast iron pan and asked how to know when the steak was ready. I said to listen for the sound it makes when you press it with tongs. We argued pleasantly about whether that was science. He said he would call me next week. And I believed him. At work, I watched Mark step outside for his 10-minute call and thought about how wisdom sometimes looks like ritual. I put a reminder on my calendar that said speak the obvious. When it popped up, I practiced. I told a colleague I appreciated how she kept meetings humane. I told my sister I was wrong to correct her in that conversation months ago. I told my mother I was scared. And she said she knew, and that it was all right to be scared and to speak anyway. Climax is not always a trumpet. Sometimes it is a string of small yeses that pulls you back from a cliff. But there was a moment that felt like sunlight after days of rain. It was a Saturday. We were at the grocery store late at night because we had forgotten half the list. In the cereal aisle, she held up 2 boxes and asked which one tasted like our old apartment. I laughed in a way that surprised me. We chose the wrong one on purpose. At the checkout, I reached for the bill. And then I stopped and looked at her. "Thank you for coming with me," I said. She nodded. In the parking lot, we ate a cookie that did not make it home. We stood under the streetlight and ate in silence that was not empty. The conclusion is supposed to be tidy. Life is not. We still argue. We still get tired. There are days when the old habit taps at the window and asks to be let in. On those days, we have a rule. We name what is happening out loud. We speak the obvious. We chose a 10-minute walk. We write a note and leave it where the other person will find it. We refuse to let tenderness be postponed. If you have listened this far, here is the part where I ask you to move. Take the smallest action that proves you are done keeping love a secret. Call the friend you have been waiting to hear from. Tell your partner one true sentence about today. Write a note to your grown child and say what you admire that has nothing to do with their achievements. Put your phone face down for 10 minutes and look at the person who shares your table. I lost a marriage to silence. And I'm still learning how to speak. I am learning that the opposite of neglect is not grand romance. It is attention. It is paid in daily installments. It is the courage to be awkward and honest and specific. Tonight I will make the call I used to postpone. I will ask the question that scares me a little. I will say thank you in a way that lands. If you do the same, we will both sleep better. And tomorrow, when the day tries to hurry us past the people we love, we will remember the truth. The mistake is silent. We do not have to be.